The courtroom was supposed to be about justice. It had never been about watching your child sit completely alone. Judge Margaret Whitmore's hands trembled as she adjusted her reading glasses, pretending to review the case files spread before her elevated bench. But her eyes weren't on the legal documents. They were fixed on the back row of the courtroom, where her 14-year-old son David sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring at nothing with the hollow expression that had haunted her for 8 months. The irony wasn't lost on her. She presided over family court, making decisions about custody, about what was best for children, about keeping families together. Yet here she was, watching her own son fade away like smoke, and she was powerless to stop it. David hadn't spoken to her in 3 weeks, not since she'd missed his physical therapy appointment to handle an emergency custody hearing, not since she'd chosen her courtroom over his recovery session for the 5th time that month, not since he'd stopped believing she would ever choose him first. The accident had taken his legs. Her choices were taking everything else. "Your Honor, we're ready to proceed with the Peterson custody case," the bailiff announced, jolting Margaret from her thoughts. She forced herself to focus on the proceedings unfolding before her. Another broken family, another child caught between parents who had forgotten what love looked like. Margaret had seen thousands of cases like this, but today something felt different. Today her own failures as a mother seemed to echo in every testimony, every plea, every desperate argument for custody. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The case involved 8-year-old Emma Peterson, whose parents were locked in a bitter divorce. The mother, Sarah Peterson, sat rigid in her designer suit, her lawyer shuffling through documents worth more than most people's cars. The father, Michael Peterson, wore a wrinkled button-down shirt and kept checking his watch, probably worried about missing another shift at the warehouse where he worked double time to pay child support. Margaret had seen this dynamic 1,000 times. Wealth versus love, resources versus presence. The parent who could provide everything except what mattered most, fighting against the parent who had nothing except devotion. "Mrs. Peterson," Margaret addressed the mother, "please explain to the court why you believe sole custody should be awarded to you." Sarah Peterson stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, I can provide Emma with stability, educational opportunities, health care, everything a child needs. I have an established home in Brookline, access to the best private schools, and the financial resources to ensure her future." Margaret nodded, making notes while stealing another glance at David. He hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted position, just sat there like a statue of disappointment. "And Mr. Peterson," she continued, "please state your case." Michael Peterson stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't used to courtrooms, that much was obvious. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Your Honor, I know I don't have much money. I know Emma's mother can give her things I can't afford, but I love her. I'm there for her soccer games, her school plays, when she has nightmares. I'm the one who taught her to ride a bike, who reads her bedtime stories every night I have her." His voice grew stronger. "Money can't hug you when you're scared. Money can't tell you it's proud of you when you finally master long division. Money can't promise you that no matter what happens, you'll never be alone." Margaret felt something twist in her chest. In the back row, David's head turned slightly, the first movement he'd made in an hour. "I work 2 jobs, Your Honor, not because I have to, but because I want to provide for Emma the best I can. But I also make sure I'm home for dinner every night I have her. I make sure homework gets done before TV. I make sure she knows she's the most important thing in my world." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. When was the last time she'd been home for dinner with David? When had she last helped him with homework? When had she last made him feel like he was the most important thing in her world? "Your Honor," Sarah Peterson's lawyer interjected, "my client's financial stability cannot be discounted. She can provide private tutoring, therapy if needed, summer camps, college preparation." "With respect," Michael Peterson interrupted, his voice firm now, "Emma doesn't need therapy to deal with her parents' divorce. She needs parents who put her first. She needs to know she's loved, not bought." Margaret looked at the case file, then at Michael Peterson, then at the back row where David sat. For 8 months, since the accident that had changed everything, she had been trying to buy her son's forgiveness with expensive medical equipment, the best doctors money could hire, private tutors to help him with schoolwork he could do from bed. But she hadn't been there. Not really there. "Mr. Peterson," Margaret heard herself say, "in your opinion, what does a child need most from a parent?" Michael Peterson didn't hesitate. "Time, Your Honor, real time, present time. Not the leftover time when everything else is finished, but priority time. A child needs to know that when they need you, nothing else matters more." The courtroom fell silent except for the scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. Margaret stared at Michael Peterson, seeing something in his eyes that she'd forgotten existed, the fierce, protective love of a parent who understood what truly mattered. In the back row, David slowly turned his wheelchair around and headed for the door. Margaret's heart shattered as she watched him go. The soft whir of his wheelchair motor was the only sound in the courtroom as he maneuvered through the heavy doors that led to the hallway. No one else seemed to notice. They were all focused on the custody battle playing out before them, but Margaret noticed everything. The way his shoulders slumped in defeat, the way he didn't look back, the way he'd given up on her entirely. "Your Honor?" the bailiff prompted gently. "Shall we continue?" Margaret blinked, realizing she'd been staring at the empty doorway for a full minute. Yes, of course." But as Michael Peterson continued his testimony about the importance of being present for your child, Margaret felt something breaking apart inside her chest. Every word he spoke was an indictment of her own failures. Every passionate plea for time over money was a mirror, showing her exactly what kind of mother she'd become. The kind who chose her career over her child's recovery. The kind who provided everything except what mattered most. The kind who was losing her son one silent day at a time. After the hearing ended, with Margaret granting joint custody that heavily favored the father who understood that presence mattered more than presence, she sat alone in her chambers, staring at a photograph on her desk. It showed her and David from before the accident. They were laughing at something, probably one of his terrible jokes that only a mother could find funny. His smile was wide and genuine, his eyes bright with the confidence that came from knowing his mother thought he was the most amazing person in the world. She couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at her like that. Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her calendar, meeting with court administrators, dinner with the Bar Association, conference call with State Judicial Committee. Every slot filled with obligations that felt monumentally important just hours ago and completely meaningless now. She thought about Michael Peterson, a single father working 2 jobs who still managed to be home for bedtime stories. She thought about his words, real time, present time, priority time. For 8 months, she'd been giving David leftover time, the tired, distracted moments when she wasn't thinking about cases or administrative duties or career advancement. She'd been giving him the scraps of her attention while serving the full meal to everyone else. Margaret closed her calendar and walked out of her chambers. She found David in the courthouse lobby, sitting by the large windows that overlooked the city. He wasn't looking at the view. He was staring at his hands folded in his lap, his face expressionless. "David?" she said softly, approaching his wheelchair. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. I know you're angry with me, she continued, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. I know I've been absent. Even when I'm there, I'm not really there. Still nothing. Today, a father stood in my courtroom and talked about what children need from their parents. And I realized that I've been giving you everything except what you need most. David's hands tightened slightly, but he remained silent. I've been trying to fix everything with money and resources and the best doctors money can hire. But I haven't been trying to fix it with the one thing that actually matters. Margaret's voice cracked. I haven't been trying to fix it with love, with presence, with making you my first priority instead of my last thought of the day. A tear rolled down David's cheek, but he still didn't speak. I can't undo the accident, Margaret whispered. I can't give you back your legs or take away the pain or erase the last 8 months, but I can promise you that things are going to change, starting right now. She reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. For a moment she thought he might pull away, but instead his fingers curled slightly, accepting her touch for the first time in weeks. What do you want to do tonight? She asked. Anything you want. We'll do it together. David was quiet for so long that Margaret began to think he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I just want to go home and watch a movie with you, like we used to. Margaret felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. Then that's exactly what we'll do. As they made their way toward the courthouse exit, Margaret caught a glimpse of Michael Peterson in the hallway, hugging his daughter close while her mother signed paperwork with obvious reluctance. Emma Peterson looked up at her father with complete trust, absolute certainty that she was the center of his universe. Margaret wanted David to look at her like that again, and for the first time in 8 months, she believed it might be possible, because sometimes the most important testimony isn't given by witnesses or experts or lawyers. Sometimes it comes from a father who understands that love isn't measured in dollars or opportunities or prestigious schools. Sometimes it comes from someone who reminds you that the real verdict that matters is the one your child renders every single day about whether they believe they matter to you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to get that verdict right. The weeks following the Peterson custody hearing marked the beginning of something Margaret had never experienced, the deliberate restructuring of a life that had been built around everything except what mattered most. She started small. Tuesday evening, she canceled a judicial committee meeting to take David to physical therapy, not just to drive him there and wait in the car while making phone calls, but to actually sit in the session, to watch him struggle with exercises that would have been effortless before the accident, to see the determination in his eyes when he thought no one was paying attention. You don't have to stay, David said quietly as Margaret pulled up a chair in the therapy room. I want to, she replied, and for the first time in months, she meant it completely. Dr. Sarah Chen, David's physical therapist, looked surprised to see Margaret actually present instead of pacing in the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear. Judge Whitmore, I'm glad you're here. David's been working incredibly hard, but I think he'd benefit from seeing your support. Margaret watched as David transferred from his wheelchair to the parallel bars, his arms shaking with effort. She had paid for this therapy for 8 months, but had never actually witnessed what it entailed. The sheer physical and emotional courage it required, the way David's jaw clenched with determination as he attempted to bear weight on legs that could no longer feel the floor beneath them. That's it, David, Dr. Chen encouraged. Remember, we're not trying to walk today. We're just building strength and maintaining circulation. I used to run track, David said suddenly, his voice strained with effort. It was the first time he'd mentioned his athletic past since the accident. I know, Margaret said softly. You were the fastest miler in your division. David glanced at her, surprised. You remember that? Margaret's throat tightened. I remember everything. I stopped showing it. After the session, as they drove home in comfortable silence, David spoke again. Mom? Yes? Why did you really start coming to these sessions? Was it because of something that happened at work? Margaret considered lying, giving him some generic answer about having more time in her schedule. But Michael Peterson's words echoed in her mind. Children deserved honesty, along with presence. There was a custody case, she said carefully. A father fighting for time with his daughter. He said something that made me realize I'd been giving you leftover time instead of priority time. David was quiet for several blocks. What did he say? He said that a child needs to know that when they need you, nothing else matters more. And you believed him? Margaret pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. I believed him because I saw you sitting in the back of my courtroom, completely alone, and I realized that's how you've felt for months, alone even when I'm right there with you. David's eyes filled with tears. I thought you didn't want to deal with me anymore, like I was just another problem to manage. Margaret's heart shattered. David, no, you're not a problem to manage. You're my son. You're the most important thing in my world, and I'm so sorry I let you forget that. That night, they ordered pizza and watched 3 Marvel movies in a row, something Margaret hadn't done since David was 10 years old. She turned off her phone completely, ignored the stack of case files that needed review, and focused entirely on the son she'd been slowly losing to her own ambition. This is nice, David said around midnight, his head resting against her shoulder on the couch. Yes, it is, Margaret agreed, stroking his hair like she used to when he was small. Can we do this again tomorrow? We can do this every night if you want. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Margaret spent the next week learning to say no to things that had always felt essential. She declined a speaking engagement at a legal symposium. She asked her clerk to reschedule non-urgent meetings. She stopped taking work calls after 6 p.m. Most importantly, she started really listening to David. I've been thinking about going back to school, he said one evening as they cooked dinner together, another new tradition Margaret was determined to maintain. Back to Riverside Prep? Margaret asked, surprised. David had been doing tutoring at home since the accident. Maybe. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of feeling like being in a wheelchair makes me less than everyone else. Margaret paused in her chopping of vegetables. You're not less than anyone, David. You're extraordinary. Easy to say, harder to feel when you're the kid everyone stares at. Do you want to visit the school, see how you feel about it? David considered this. Would you come with me? Not just drop me off, but actually come inside and meet with the counselors. 6 months ago, Margaret would have delegated this to an aide or tried to schedule it during lunch hour. Now she simply nodded. Of course, when do you want to go? They visited Riverside Prep the following Thursday. Margaret had cleared her entire morning, something that would have been unthinkable before the Peterson case. As they toured the campus, Margaret watched David carefully, gauging his comfort level, noting which areas were fully accessible and which might present challenges. Judge Whitmore? A voice called from behind them. Margaret turned to see Michael Peterson walking toward them, wearing a maintenance uniform with Riverside Prep facilities embroidered on the chest. Mr. Peterson, Margaret said, genuinely pleased to see him. I didn't know you worked here. Started last week, day shift here, evening shift at the warehouse. He smiled at David. And you must be David. I'm Michael. David shook Michael's hand, studying him with curious eyes. You're the father from Mom's courtroom, the one fighting for custody of your daughter. That's right. Michael glanced between them. How did that work out for you, if you don't mind me asking? Joint custody favoring my time with Emma, Michael said, his smile widening. "Your mother made a decision that changed our lives." "She's been changing ours too," David said quietly. "If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Over the following weeks, Michael Peterson became an unexpected presence in their lives. Not intrusive, but somehow always there when they needed him. When David's wheelchair got stuck in the school's main entrance due to a broken automatic door, Michael appeared within minutes to fix it. When Margaret's car wouldn't start after a parent meeting, Michael offered to take a look under the hood. "You don't have to keep helping us," Margaret told him one afternoon as he adjusted the height on David's desk in his new classroom. "I want to," Michael said simply. "Besides, David reminds me a lot of Emma. Smart kids who've been through tough times need adults who show up consistently." Margaret watched Michael work, noting the careful precision with which he approached every task. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "In the courtroom, when you talked about being present for your child, how did you learn that? It seems to come so naturally to you." Michael paused in his adjustments and sat back on his heels. "It doesn't come naturally at all. I learned it from making mistakes." He gestured toward David, who was across the room talking with his new history teacher. "Emma went through a period after her mother and I separated where she stopped talking to me entirely. I was working so much trying to prove I could provide for her financially that I stopped providing for her emotionally." "What changed?" "She drew me a picture. It was supposed to be our family, but I wasn't in it. When I asked her why, she said, 'I only draw people who are really there.'" Michael's voice grew soft. "That night I realized I could work 100 hours a week and still lose her if I didn't make her feel like she mattered more than the work." Margaret felt a familiar pang of recognition. "How long did it take to rebuild her trust?" "We're still rebuilding it," Michael said honestly. "But the difference is that now she knows she's my priority. Even when I'm at work, she knows that if she needs me, I'll find a way to be there." That evening, as Margaret and David drove home from the school, David was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked. "Mr. Peterson seems like a good dad." "He does. He reminds me of you," David said. "The way you used to be before the accident, before work became more important than everything else." Margaret pulled into their driveway and turned to face her son. "Work isn't more important than you, David. It never was. I just got confused about how to show that." "I know that now," David said, "and I know you're trying to change. But Mom," "Yes?" "I'm scared that when things get busy again, you'll forget. I'm scared that this version of you, the one who comes to my therapy and helps with homework and watches movies until midnight, I'm scared she'll disappear again." Margaret unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for David's hand. "Do you want to know a secret?" David nodded. "I'm scared of the same thing. I'm scared that I'll slip back into old patterns and lose you again. But David, I'm more scared of losing you than I am of anything else in the world, including my career." "Really?" "Really, and I'm going to prove it to you every single day for as long as it takes." The following Monday, Margaret made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She requested a reduced caseload. Judge Whitmore, Chief Judge Robert Harrison, said during their meeting, "You're one of our most respected family court judges. Are you sure you want to step back?" "I'm not stepping back," Margaret clarified. "I'm stepping toward what matters most. My son needs me present, not just available. And I've learned that being present requires making deliberate choices about how I spend my time. This could affect your consideration for the appellate court position." Margaret had been working toward that appointment for 5 years. It represented everything she'd thought she wanted: prestige, increased salary, the pinnacle of judicial achievement. "Then it affects it," she said simply. Chief Judge Harrison studied her carefully. "May I ask what brought about this change?" Margaret thought about David sitting alone in her courtroom, about Michael Peterson's testimony on the importance of priority time, about her son's fear that the mother who showed up might disappear again. "I presided over a custody case where a father taught me something I'd forgotten," she said. "He taught me that the most important verdict isn't the one you render in court. It's the one your child renders about whether they believe they matter to you." That afternoon, Margaret picked David up from school personally, something she'd started doing every day since his return to Riverside Prep. "How was your day?" she asked as he transferred from his wheelchair to the passenger seat. "Good. Better than good, actually." David's eyes were bright with excitement. "I joined the debate team." "David, that's wonderful. When's your first competition?" "Next Friday at 3 p.m. David hesitated. "I know you usually have court on Fridays." "Not next Friday," Margaret said firmly. "Next Friday I'll be in the front row watching my son win his first debate." David grinned, the first real unguarded smile Margaret had seen from him since before the accident. "You don't even know what side I'm arguing." "Doesn't matter. I know you'll be brilliant." As they drove home, Margaret realized something profound had shifted in their relationship. The fear in David's eyes had been replaced by trust. The distance between them had been replaced by connection. The awkward silences had been replaced by easy conversation about school, friends, dreams for the future. "Mom?" David said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you for letting me." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, another ritual that had become sacred, Margaret's phone rang. It was Michael Peterson. "Judge Whitmore, I hope you don't mind me calling. Emma has been asking if David would like to come to her soccer game this Saturday. She said she'd like to meet the boy, whose mom helped keep our family together." Margaret looked at David, who was listening to the conversation with interest. "What do you think?" she asked him. "Want to go watch Emma play soccer?" David nodded enthusiastically. "I'd like that." "We'll be there," Margaret told Michael. After she hung up, David looked at her with curiosity. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think Mr. Peterson is lonely, raising Emma by himself, I mean?" Margaret considered the question. "I think single parenting is challenging for anyone. Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking. We know what it's like to be a family that's trying to figure things out. Maybe we could all figure it out together sometimes." Margaret studied her son's face, seeing the compassion there, the wisdom that had grown from his own difficult experience. "I think that's a beautiful idea," she said softly. As they finished cooking dinner together, Margaret realized that the Peterson custody case had changed more than just two families' living arrangements. It had reminded her that families could be created through choice as well as biology, that healing could happen through connection as well as medicine, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from the people you least expected to teach them. The accident had taken David's legs, but Margaret's choices had nearly taken everything else. Now, through the grace of second chances and the wisdom of a single father who understood what children needed most, they were building something new, something better, something that prioritized presence over prestige, connection over achievement, love over everything else that had once seemed so important. Saturday's soccer game became a turning point none of them had anticipated. Margaret and David arrived at the Riverside Athletic Complex to find Michael Peterson setting up folding chairs on the sideline. a cooler full of water bottles at his feet and nervous energy radiating from every movement. "She's been talking about this game all week," Michael explained as they approached. "First time since the divorce that she's felt confident enough to invite people to watch her play." Emma Peterson ran over from where the team was warming up, her ponytail bouncing and cheeks flushed with excitement. "David, you came!" "Wouldn't miss it," David said from his wheelchair, genuinely smiling. "I hear you're the fastest player on the team." "Second fastest," Emma corrected with impressive honesty, "but I'm the best at assist passes." As the game began, Margaret found herself genuinely invested in Emma's performance. The 8-year-old played with fearless determination, setting up scoring opportunities for her teammates with the kind of selfless intelligence that spoke to her character. "She's remarkable," Margaret told Michael during halftime. "She gets that from her mother," Michael said quietly. "Sarah was a college athlete. Emma has her competitive spirit." "But she gets her heart from you," David added unexpectedly. Michael looked surprised. "What makes you say that?" "The way she helped that girl who fell down. She could have kept playing, but she stopped to make sure she was okay. That's not competitive spirit. That's kindness." Margaret watched Michael's face light up with pride, and something stirred in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Not the professional satisfaction of a successful ruling, but something deeper, something personal. The crisis came in the second half. Emma was racing toward the goal when another player collided with her, sending both girls tumbling to the ground. Emma didn't get up. Michael was on the field before the referee could blow his whistle. Margaret and David close behind. Emma was conscious but crying, clutching her left wrist at an unnatural angle. "It's broken," the coach said grimly after a quick examination. "We need to get her to the hospital." "I'll drive," Margaret said immediately. Michael looked at her in surprise. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Margaret said firmly, already helping Emma to her feet. "David, can you grab Michael's things? We're all going together." At Boston Children's Hospital, they waited in the emergency room while Emma's wrist was x-rayed and set. The little girl was brave throughout the process, only crying when the nurse had to manipulate the bone back into position. "You're being incredibly brave," Margaret told her as they waited for the cast to dry. "Dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Emma replied, her voice small but steady. "It means you do what you need to do, even when you are scared." Margaret glanced at Michael, seeing the profound love and pride in his eyes as he watched his daughter. "Your dad is very wise." "I know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He says you're wise too. He says you changed our whole life." 4 hours later, they finally left the hospital. Emma was exhausted, sporting a bright pink cast that she'd already decided was actually pretty cool, and Michael was running on pure parental adrenaline. "I should call Sarah," he said as they reached Margaret's car. "Let her know what happened." "Do you want privacy for the call?" Margaret asked. Michael shook his head. "She'll probably want to come get Emma anyway. Take her to her house where she can properly care for her." There was no bitterness in his voice, just weary acceptance. The phone call went exactly as Michael had predicted. Sarah Peterson's voice was sharp enough to hear from several feet away, demanding to know how Michael had let this happen, insisting that Emma needed to be in a real home with proper supervision while she recovered. "Sarah, she's fine," Michael said calmly. "It's just a broken wrist. Kids break bones." "Not when they're being properly supervised," came the cutting response. Margaret watched Michael's shoulders slump slightly, saw the doubt creep into his eyes. The same doubt she'd seen in her own reflection for months. The fear that maybe you really weren't good enough, that maybe everyone else could see your failures more clearly than you could see your love. "Mr. Peterson," Margaret said loudly enough for Sarah to hear through the phone, "could you ask Mrs. Peterson if she'd like me to provide a medical report for the court? As the presiding judge in your custody case, I can document that this was a normal childhood injury that occurred during a supervised recreational activity." Michael's eyes widened. He relayed Margaret's offer, and the change in Sarah's tone was immediate and dramatic. "Judge Whitmore is there?" Sarah's voice became instantly deferential. "Oh, well, if Judge Whitmore believes the medical care was appropriate." The conversation ended quickly after that, with Sarah agreeing that Emma should stay with Michael as scheduled, since disrupting her routine might be harmful during her recovery. After Michael hung up, he looked at Margaret with something approaching awe. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Margaret replied. "Emma belongs with the parent who sees her as a precious child to be cherished, not a liability to be managed. But legally, you can't really provide that kind of report, can you?" Margaret smiled. "Legally, I can provide any documentation I deem relevant to the welfare of a child under my jurisdiction, and Emma's welfare clearly benefits from being with the parent who teaches her that being brave means doing what you need to do, even when you're scared." That evening, back at Margaret's house, they ordered Chinese takeout and spread the containers across the coffee table while Emma dozed on the couch, exhausted from her hospital adventure. David was teaching her to play a simple card game that could be managed with one good hand. "This is nice," Emma said sleepily, "like having a big brother." David's face lit up with pleased surprise. "I've never been anyone's big brother before." "Well, you're good at it," Emma declared with 8-year-old authority. "You explain things without making me feel stupid." Margaret and Michael exchanged a look over the children's heads, a moment of shared understanding that transcended their different circumstances. They were both single parents trying to do right by their children. They had both made mistakes, faced criticism, doubted themselves. But they were both here, present, choosing their children over easier paths. "Margaret," Michael said quietly while the children were distracted by their card game, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "When David had his accident, how did you handle the fear, the guilt, the feeling that everything was falling apart and you didn't know how to fix it?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't handle it well," she admitted. "I threw myself into work even more than usual. I convinced myself that if I could just achieve enough professionally, if I could just make enough money and hire the best doctors and create the perfect environment, I could somehow make it all okay. Did it work? Not at all. It just made David feel like he was another problem I was trying to solve instead of my son, who needed me to simply be present with him in his pain." Michael nodded slowly. "I've been doing the same thing with Emma, working extra shifts, saving money for her college fund, trying to prove to the court and to Sarah and to myself that I can provide for her." "But you can provide for her," Margaret said softly. "You provide her with something no amount of money can buy. You provide her with the absolute certainty that she matters more to you than anything else in the world." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I watched you with her today. When she got hurt, you didn't hesitate. You didn't think about work or schedules or anything else. You just moved toward your child because she needed you. That's not something you can learn or buy or fake. That's love." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder if love is enough." "It's not," Margaret said, surprising him. "Love isn't enough by itself, but love combined with presence, with consistency, with the willingness to choose your child over and over again, even when it's difficult, that's everything." Later that evening, after Michael and Emma had gone home, Margaret found David in his room, staring out the window at the city lights. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his desk. "Today was good," he said simply. "It was, even with Emma getting hurt. Especially because of that." David turned his wheelchair to face her. "Mom, did you see how Mr. Peterson handled it? He didn't panic or blame anyone or make it about him. He just focused on taking care of Emma." Margaret nodded. "He's a good father. He reminds me of how you used to be with me. Before the accident. Before you got scared." The observation hit Margaret like a physical blow. "I did get scared, didn't I?" "Yeah. And when you got scared, you stopped being my mom and started being my manager." David's voice was gentle without accusation. "But today, watching you with Emma, watching you help Mr. Peterson, you were being a mom again, not just to me, but to all of us." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm still scared, David. I'm terrified of making the wrong choices for you, of not being enough, of failing you again." "But you're not letting the fear make your choices anymore," David observed with wisdom beyond his 14 years. "You're letting love make them instead." The next morning brought the crisis Margaret hadn't seen coming. Chief Judge Harrison called her into his office with an expression that made her stomach drop. "Margaret, I've received a complaint about your conduct at the Peterson hearing last week." Margaret's blood ran cold. "What kind of complaint?" "Sarah Peterson is alleging that you showed bias toward her ex-husband due to personal relationships outside the courtroom. She's claiming you've been socializing with Michael Peterson and his daughter, which she says compromises your judicial objectivity." Margaret sank into the chair across from Harrison's desk, her mind racing. "Who filed the complaint?" "Mrs. Peterson's attorney. They're requesting a full review of the custody decision and questioning whether you should have recused yourself." The irony was devastating. For months, Margaret had been making choices based on career advancement and professional reputation. Now, when she'd finally started making choices based on what was right for the children involved, her career was being threatened. "Judge Harrison," Margaret said carefully, "my relationship with the Peterson family began after the custody hearing. The decision I made was based entirely on what I observed in the courtroom and what I believed was in Emma's best interests." "I believe you, Margaret, but the appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as actual impropriety. The Judicial Review Board is going to want answers." Margaret drove home that afternoon, feeling like her world was collapsing again. Just when she'd learned to balance her professional responsibilities with her personal priorities, the two were colliding in a way that threatened both. She found David in the kitchen, making himself a snack with the casual independence he'd developed since returning to school. "How was your day?" he asked, then looked up and saw her expression. "What's wrong?" Margaret sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "There might be some complications with the Peterson custody case. Mrs. Peterson is claiming I was biased because we've become friends with her ex-husband and Emma." David's face darkened with understanding. "She's trying to get the decision changed?" "Possibly." "What does that mean for Emma?" "I don't know yet." David was quiet for a moment, then moved his wheelchair closer to where his mother sat. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, saw the strength he'd developed through his own trials, the wisdom he'd gained from watching her struggle to find her way back to what mattered most. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said finally. "I'm going to explain that my decision was based on what I witnessed in that courtroom. A father who understood that children need presence more than presence. And if that costs me my career, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." "Really? Really?" Margaret reached for David's hand. "Because I finally understand what Mr. Peterson was trying to say. The most important verdict isn't the one you render in court. It's the one your child renders about whether they believe they matter to you. And David, you matter more to me than any career, any reputation, any professional achievement. David squeezed her hand. Mom? Yes? Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. All of us. You and me and Mr. Peterson and Emma. We're like a family now, and families stick together. Margaret felt something settle in her chest. A peace she hadn't experienced in months. Not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of knowing she was finally asking the right questions. The questions that started with her child's well-being and ended with the same place. The questions that made love the priority and everything else negotiable. The questions that would guide her through whatever crisis came next, because she was no longer facing them alone. 3 months later, the Judicial Review Board rendered their decision. Margaret's custody ruling would stand, and no disciplinary action would be taken. The investigation had revealed that Margaret's decision was thoroughly supported by courtroom evidence and expert testimony about child welfare. More importantly, it revealed that Margaret Whitmore had become exactly the kind of judge the family court system needed. One who understood that behind every case file was a real child who deserved to have their best interests truly considered. The appellate court appointment went to someone else. Margaret didn't mind. She had found something far more valuable than professional advancement. She had found her way back to the mother David needed her to be. On a warm Saturday evening, 6 months after Emma's broken wrist brought them all together, Margaret and David hosted dinner for Michael and Emma. It had become a weekly tradition, a chosen family gathering where laughter filled the spaces that had once been hollow with ambition and fear. Judge Whitmore, Emma said as they cleared the dinner dishes together, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart, and you can call me Margaret." "Margaret, do you think my mom will ever understand that Dad is a good parent?" Margaret knelt down to Emma's level, thinking carefully about her answer. "I think your mom loves you very much, Emma. Sometimes adults get confused about how to show love, and they think providing things is the same as providing presents. But love has a way of teaching us what really matters, if we're willing to listen." Emma nodded seriously. "Dad says that too. He says love is patient and kind, and it never gives up on people." "Your dad is very wise." "I know. Are you going to marry him?" Margaret nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Emma." "What? David and I already planned the whole wedding. You'd wear a yellow dress because it's the color of happiness, and we'd have cake and dancing and everything." From the living room, Margaret could hear David and Michael laughing at something on television, a sound that had become as familiar and comforting as her own heartbeat. "And why do you think we should get married?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious about Emma's 8-year-old reasoning. "Because you make each other happy, and because we're already a family anyway. We just need to make it official so David can really be my big brother, and you can really be my second mom, and Dad can really be David's second dad." Margaret smiled, her heart full to overflowing. "Those are pretty good reasons. I know, I'm very smart about these things." That night, after Michael and Emma had gone home, Margaret sat with David on their back porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "She asked me about marrying her dad," Margaret said quietly. David grinned. "I told her she should. You two are good together, and Michael makes you laugh in a way I haven't heard since before the accident." "Is that your professional opinion, Dr. David?" "That's my son opinion, the opinion that matters most to you." Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "You know what I've learned through all of this?" "What?" "That the most important testimony isn't given in a courtroom. It's given every day in the choices we make about who and what matters most to us." David nodded thoughtfully. And what does our testimony say? Margaret looked at her son, this wise, brave, extraordinary young man who had forgiven her failures and believed in her capacity to change, and felt the truth settle in her heart like a blessing. It says that love wins, she said simply. It says that presence matters more than prestige. It says that families can be built through choice as well as biology. And it says that sometimes the most important verdict is the one that happens not in a courthouse, but in a heart that finally understands what truly matters. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Margaret Whitmore married Michael Peterson in a small garden ceremony, officiated by Pastor Reynolds from their church. David served as best man, and Emma was indeed the flower girl, wearing her yellow dress because it's the color of happiness, and today is the happiest day ever. In the front row sat Mrs. Baker, who had become an honorary grandmother to all the children involved, and Chief Judge Harrison, who had offered to perform the ceremony himself because any judge wise enough to choose love over advancement deserves all the happiness life can offer. During their vows, Margaret promised to always remember that the most important case she would ever preside over was the family they were creating together. Michael promised to always remember that the most important testimony he could ever give was the daily choice to put their children first. And David and Emma, standing beside their parents as witnesses to this new beginning, exchanged a look that said they had known this day would come all along, because children understand what adults sometimes forget. That love, when it's real and patient and present, always finds a way to create the families we need. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.